Hello everyone, and welcome to the next episode on a self-worth driven education. In this episode, we're going to take some time to discuss how the concept we've covered so far might apply to an actual lesson plan. As you recall, so far we've discussed objectives without limits, we've discussed need-based planning, and we've discussed how we can allow students to choose their own path. So now let's open up a lesson plan and see what it actually takes to integrate these concepts into it. I'll just go ahead and open up my lesson plan here, and we can begin. As you can see here, we've got your pretty standard lesson plan. This one is for grade 8 English. We're covering some concepts in descriptive writing. Now in this lesson plan, it's clearly got a marked section for the learning objectives, identified as I can statements. And then down below that, we have the approach and methodology the teacher is going to use. This teacher has designed it as a weekly plan. So you've got day-wise what each student will do and how they will work themselves through each of the concepts. Then finally, resources, brief overview of the projects, activities, and of course assessments and so on. So this is your standard lesson plan. Now the first thing we're going to do is integrate the idea of objectives without limits. If you recall, the way we do that is we make sure that students are celebrating the objectives, but they're evaluating themselves against the goals. Now we can see here that there's a pretty gaping hole. We don't have any goals. So the first thing we need to do is add a row for goals. These goals typically will look like projects, goals which are tangible to the student, something that they can actually get behind and be excited about. You're trying to remove the idea of from the student's head that they won't need this skill that they're learning, because the goal is the here and now of why they need that skill. But the goal itself is not enough. Now that we have a goal, we need students to be able to focus on the goal. So how are we going to keep them focused on the goals that they're working on? And finally, now that we've got them evaluating themselves against their goals, what about these objectives? We've defined the objectives here. They need to be able to celebrate the objectives. So we're going to identify objective, milestones. If you recall, I actually compared the milestones and as milestones on a trek through Yosemite, through Half Dome. If that's the case, then each time you cross a milestone, you need to find a way of celebrating it, recognizing it, getting students to understand their accomplishment and moving forward. So what I'm going to do in this video, I'm going to create these placeholders in an existing lesson plan and then show you what it might look like when you fill it in. So if I come over here and show you a lesson plan where I've actually filled in the objectives without limits. As I said, we're going to focus on how we celebrate objectives and how we evaluate goals. I've color-coded it, so the green areas are the areas which I've added for how we identify objectives without limits. As we said, the student goals. This is from the student perspective. Think of it as an I can statement for the whole project. This is obviously an IGCSE Cambridge curriculum board exam class. In grade 8, they're already beginning preparation. If a student can read that board exam article and find the clues, solve the puzzle, and understand the author's point, that is something that the student can get behind because they know that board exam is coming. So we can use this. In middle school, probably this may not work. You'll have to create it as a project. In science, the most obvious thing to put as a goal is the lab itself. Sometimes we think of labs as secondary to the actual content in science, but if labs are the project itself, then from there everything can stem, and every student, as you know, will get behind the idea of working on a lab. So now we've got this, we've got the goal. How do we get students to focus on the goal? So here's where we expand on that. And what I've done here is just a simple little idea. Of course, you can use your own creativity to make it happen. Have a packet of interesting articles at the front of the class, something for everyone. So you know your students, you know what interests them. If it's sports related, let it be sports related. But find those articles which are at least at that board exam level, reading skill required. Go through each article each day. So keep that focus on the goal. The article and the understanding of that article is the goal. And now coming down to the objectives, what do we do with them? Well, we need to treat them like small wins. We don't need to tell your student, okay, you need to cross this objective. Just like when you're trekking through, you're going on a trek, you won't think to yourself, oh, I need to cross milestone marker 5, milestone marker 6. But when you do, you need to celebrate. So in this, again, a simple idea which I put together, you have a chart on the wall. The teacher can put up a chart on the wall. It keeps a tally of the students who have cleared each of the 6 objectives listed above. As each is clear, the tally increases, and find ways to celebrate that tally. When the entire class clears an objective, have some form of celebration, some form of recognition which can be done. And this is key. Do not refer directly to the learning objective unless it is to recognize the student. We don't need to tell a student, hey, you need to learn how to figure out the semantics field. That's why we're doing this. No, what we're doing is trying to understand the puzzle of that article. The goal is why we're doing this. When they're able to understand the semantics field in the course of going through these steps to achieve their goal, that's when we celebrate the fact that they've done it. So here's a simple way of integrating objectives without limits into a lesson plan. From here, we're going to see how we can integrate the idea of students choosing their own path. This is done in integrating 3 concepts: the idea of a constructivist environment, the idea of scaffolding, and of course the idea of choice. Now, for the environment, the constructivist environment has to do with the goal. The goal should be experienced through the environment. So obviously what we need to do is we need to add 1 row below how students focus on the goal and discuss the goal environment. Here's where we will integrate the focus of the students' focus on the goal with the environment and how the environment brings out that focus. Next, we're going to come down here to this idea of teaching methodology and approach, and we're going to add 1 row above it, which sort of provides a blueprint within the blueprint, and this is going to be your scaffolding framework, or I'll call it scaffolding integration. Right, so we've got the teaching methodology and approach, but within this, we need a plan that maps into this where scaffolding can occur. And then throughout all of this, somewhere, choice has to be a big part of it. So really these 3 things, if we can bring about within our lesson plan, we have successfully brought about the idea of students choosing their own path. At least at the very basic, simplistic level. Now, as I said, I've got one that's already completed. I've marked the areas where I've done this integration in orange, where students can choose their own path. So we come down, first I'll look at the goal environment. It's literally an environment. We're going to create a wall on the back of the screen, on the back of the classroom, pin the articles in large font so they're clearly visible, and allow students to directly annotate on the wall. The idea is you want students to walk back there and see each other's articles, see each other's progress. This is how we create that environment where the goal, as it's being realized, is experienced in the environment of the classroom itself. In an online classroom, this might look very different. You might be using a blog, which is shared, or you might use a wiki, or you might use anything, which can be shared so that it creates the environment of the classroom. But the idea is the experiencing of the work. It's not just a showcase. The work has to be experienced there itself. And then we've modified how students focus on the goal by saying the students can select one of the articles which they find interesting. So you're going to present a variety of articles. The teacher in this case can do that. And the students will pick an article based on their area of interest. Obviously, it's not that they each have to pick unique articles. Let them pick the one that they find interesting, because that's going to be their goal. They want to be able to process and understand that author and that article. Now, coming down to the teaching methodology, we added this idea of scaffolding. And here, we've got the same day-wise plan, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But now, whatever is being taught throughout the activities in the approach and methodology, it's being implemented upon that article. That article is the project. It is the lab. And we're walking through that lab each day, one step at a time. So the first day, you're categorizing keywords. You're using the technique found in the first day's approach. Think, pair, share. You're partnering with other students to refine that idea of semantic field, and so on. So this is how scaffolding is integrated within that overarching goal, done and performed within the environment that we have just created. And as you can see, I had to take this step where within the methodology, I've added where I'm going to allow that scaffolding, that integration of the goal to take place. The goal doesn't have to be this all-consuming effort within the classroom. Just like, if we say that the lab in a science class, the lab is the goal, the students don't have to sit in the lab the entire class period. They can still learn the content within the classroom. But somehow that connection back to the lab has to be made every day. And so you can see here I've just left placeholders where the students will walk back to that wall, that environment, and update it. Whatever they've gained, they're going to experience it within that environment of the article which is hanging on the wall. So this is how we create the idea of choice within the student and their education. And the last one, which we're going to bring about, is needs-based planning. And this one, it almost sits on top of the other two in the entire lesson plan. We need to identify the student needs, and then we need to map them to the plan. So the first thing is first. We're up here now, where we're looking at the learners. We know they're grade 8. We know how many there are, 20. We're going to add one row below it. We'll merge all these cells, make it one thing, and we're going to call it student needs. You know your students, you know your class, you know what they need. We're going to look at academic needs. And in my case, I'm looking at very specific needs which I want to see fulfilled. Global citizenship needs, stemming from those global citizenship objectives. And then finally, if you know anything about me, you know that I'm all about discovering self-worth. And so then self-worth needs. In fact, this whole series is called the Self-Worth Driven Education. So I need to include self-worth needs. So these are the 3 needs I'm going to look for. You might have another set of needs. You might have a need called parent needs. What are the needs that the parents have identified in their students? Or you might just find a need that you have identified, maybe a counseling or a psychoanalytical need, or an emotional need, or a group dynamic need. You can create the needs as you see fit, but this is where you're going to identify what you want to work on based on the kids that you're working with, the students that you're working with. And so really all we have to do is add this section, but you'll see now we're going to integrate each of these needs into the different phases of different aspects of this plan. So if you see a completed one, I've added academic needs. These students, they need to be able to read that content. So just develop a comfort with reading an IGCSE board exam level content. Global citizenship needs. UNESCO has identified these in their recommendation. I just copied and pasted the one that's most relevant to my group of students. I really want my kids to be able to understand the economic and political nature of what's happening in their country and the countries around them. You might find something else that you want to explore. There's quite a few different global citizenship needs that have been listed. Feel free to pick any of them which you think are relevant to your students. And then finally, there's a set of self-worth needs which I'll be sharing in the description below. This is something that I want to bring about, this equality of all learners. Now, where do we see this? You can see here, what I've done is I've found them or modified steps to incorporate them. I've brought about the global citizenship needs by choosing articles which span current and historical topics concerning different nations. So now not only are we looking at articles which are IGCSE level, but we're looking at articles which bring about that global citizenship within the student. So kind of killing two birds with one stone. And that's really what this is all about. How do you get the most bang for your buck while you're creating this plan? Here we go. I have created the academic need. Read one of these articles per day. Allow them to read it, process it, maybe discuss it just briefly. What's so interesting about this article? Have a little debate. Let them just explore the content in the article before they get into what they're trying to do with this, with the class itself. Keep in mind, here especially, we don't want to focus on those objectives. We're not looking at semantic field when we're reading the article or discussing it or debating it. We're just having fun with it. That's how you bring about that comfort level which we wanted them to, which was the need we wanted to address. And then finally, when it comes to the self-worth needs, the one we have selected is equality of all learners. We have integrated that into the environment. By taking the articles, putting it on the wall, putting a large font, which basically is done to encourage the students to come and read it, we're allowing all the students' expression and understanding to be visible to all the students, all their peers. We're not just putting the students who get it, we're not just putting the students who have done a great job or the most colorful or most beautiful. We're putting all of them. Let them explore, let them discuss, let them find out what makes each answer right. Let them help each other find the ones which they have missed. In doing so, when they realize that they're all in this together, they're all trying to better understand these articles, they will find equality amongst themselves. And then down here in the small wins, we've added another little tweak. When the entire class clears the objective, have some form of celebration. The idea of bringing the entire class together shows that they're all in it together. It's not just when each student clears the objective. Allow it to be a class celebration. Allow them all to get there. Encourage them to support each other in getting there. So this brings about equality of all learners. It's not a perfect science. You're not going to just throw this one line in there and get them to celebrate as a group, and then by next week they are all believing they're all equal. The entire system of education, which celebrates performance and merit given specific criteria, is designed to break that idea of equality. There is someone called a best student or a top student, and that's just a sad fact that we have in schools today. But what we can do is allow students to understand that just because one is performing better than the other doesn't mean one is better than the other. One of the fundamental principles of a growth mindset, and it's something that we need to see happen if self-worth is to be discovered in the students that we work with. So as you can see, we haven't done much to update this lesson plan. We've added in just the 3 components, a few extra sections up top to guide us, and that's critical because these concepts have to be our guide in planning. They don't take over, they don't consume our planning. You can plan the way you've always planned, but you need to keep these in the back of your head so that they can guide you as you go. And so this is how we can integrate the self-worth driven education concepts within our lesson plans, at least the 3 that I've identified. The idea of students being able to choose their own path, the idea that objectives can be reached without limiting the students, so objectives without limits, and then finally bringing about the idea of needs-based planning. Are we addressing the needs of our students within the plans that we design? Thank you so much for watching this. I hope it's been of help to you. Feel free to continue watching this series as we continue to share more concepts in how to bring about a self-worth driven education in your school and in your classroom.